Hello everybody and welcome back to This Week in Privacy Live episode 22, our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we're working on within the Privacy Guides community. And this week's top stories in the data privacy and cybersecurity space. So, Privacy Guides is a non-profit which researches and shares privacy-related information, and we also facilitate a community on our forum and matrix, where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. But before we dive into this week's show, here's a rundown of what's coming up. So first, we'll start with covering site updates, then we'll discuss the top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity, and then next, we'll cover some of the trending posts on the Privacy Guides forum. And finally, we'll answer viewer questions. So if you do have a question for us, make sure to leave a comment in the forum thread or the YouTube chat. And with that being said, let's kind of dive straight into the site updates. And this week, I'm joined by Kevin, our community and news intern. How are you going, Kevin?
Pretty good. I got a new headphone, a new webcam, and I'm ready to make this live stream even better. But anyways, Jordan, I heard that I have a few videos going on.
Yes, so we're kind of going at quite a large pace here. We've got quite a couple of projects going on in the background, as well as, the main project I talked about last week, which is a video on data brokers. We have a couple of extra projects going on in the background as well that we're trying to get through. But if all goes well, the data broker video will be available next week for members on early access. So if you're interested in seeing that, then that will be coming out very, very soon. But yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Kevin, for the rest of the updates this week.
Of course. And don't forget that we do have a members tier. So if you sign up for I don't know, like tiers you can subscribe to, pay a certain amount as a donation, tax-free if you live in the US. We get access to all of our videos early and perks as well, merch potentially included. Anyways, I'd like to describe another exciting development though. If you're Dutch or based in the European Union, you might have heard of Bits of Freedom before. Just as basically explain, they're a privacy advocacy organization centered around digital rights. They've done a lot of amazing work in AI security, digital privacy, and we have decided to announce a recent partnership we have with them to fix their website, particularly to update fixyeprivacy.nl. It is a Dutch language website that provides critical privacy recommendations in the Dutch language, of course. And we have a lot of members on our team willing to update and maintain this website to 2025, and we're excited to offer even additional content as well, specifically in the regards of AI and cloud storage providers. Bits of Freedom is honestly an inspiring organization. They've done a lot of amazing work, such as suing Meta for their unethical feed control practices, to advocating against the recent chat control proposal, which, spoiler alert, has been defeated for now. If you're really excited to learn more about this, we do have a press release to understand the full details and extent of our partnership. But I'll be honest with you, the sky's the limit here. We're so excited to announce one of our first formal partnerships with this organization, and there's so much more to come in the future. On that note, I'd like to pass on to the most recent article that we're going to talk about, which is, unfortunately for Windows users, there's a really good chance you're not able to bypass the account restrictions they're offering. Normally, there are certain methods to log in without a Microsoft account. What you would do is you would establish a local account instead by inputting a few console commands here and there. But unfortunately, according to Windows Central, a recent preview update has essentially removed a lot of the requirements. In the past, it's a bit of a cat and mouse game where there's a new method that was discovered by a few users trying to advocate for offline accounts, and Microsoft would stamp it out through various updates. And unfortunately, it appears that all of the new console commands have finally been fixed, meaning that as of right now, if you're planning to update to the recent insider preview, you may not be able to log in using a local account. Now, if you already have no account, you're safe for now. But if you are planning to do a fresh installation of Windows, keep that in mind, because once this update gets finalized and pushed to everyone, new users may not be able to create an account without having it be online. According to Microsoft, they stated, "We are removing known mechanisms for creating a local account in the Windows Setup Experience, OOBE. While these mechanisms were often used to bypass Microsoft account setup, they also inadvertently skip critical setup screens, potentially causing users to exit OOBE with a device that is not fully configured for use. Users will need to complete OOBE with internet and a Microsoft account to ensure the device is set up correctly." That means like certain commands such as mscx local only will no longer work on the latest versions of Windows 11. There are a few like community wiki articles that describe older methods, such as OBE/bypass NRO, or using like a European account or computer. Potentially, like those were the historical fixes that were fixed recently. Correct me if I'm wrong regarding the European method, but at least from what I know, it's incredibly difficult to use a local account nowadays. And unfortunately, like just because Microsoft has eliminated a lot of the easier methods doesn't mean there are no methods to register with an offline account. It's just a lot more complicated so far for the average person. I'm curious though, like a lot of implications here, at least on the form itself, have been whether or not this could be the final like step towards convincing a lot of Windows users to switch over to Linux. And as someone who's done that before, like this past weekend, completely unrelated though, there are some concerns with that and also a lot of benefits. Firstly, of course, is that a lot of folks like me, we do have laptops which are not very friendly towards Linux. I know historically Lenovo has been very popular amongst this community and for their amazing driver support. But as someone with like an AMD chip with a laptop with a graphics card, being very vague here with the model name, I have noticed quite a lot of issues that I had to fix specifically. So clearly, Linux is not necessarily a universal solution for this. However, it could potentially be amazing if you have, for example, a laptop or a computer that supports Linux installation. So I think by like a step-by-step basis, like it is possible to like advise like Linux as a potential alternative. But honestly, for me though, like it is very, very difficult to like recommend Linux in all cases. Just my humble opinion, as someone who does advocate for like Linux usage. But Jordan, I was wondering, have any thoughts on this? Do you believe that should people really be using Linux like as a potential alternative, like, or should we really just like figure out ways to circumvent like this requirement in Windows? Like, is this something we had to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think the one thing that like a lot of people I've noticed have been kind of thinking about right now is like the end of Windows 10 is extremely close. Like I believe it's in, well, 4 days, 3 days, depending your time zone. So like that is the question that a lot of people are having right now is like, do I want to switch to Linux or do I want to go ahead with Windows 11 because Windows 10 is losing support? So that is kind of the question that a lot of people are asking. And I think the way that Microsoft is like handling this, like it's like almost they don't want people to switch to Windows 11 because I've seen like, I don't know if it's everybody that thinks this, but I know a lot of people that like care about sort of technology related stuff. They don't really like the fact that Windows 11 actually requires an account in a lot of cases. And I think having Microsoft at this like very last stage when people are considering switching, closing all these loopholes to force people to use an online account when they don't want to, doesn't really make very much sense at all to me. So do I think that that's like a good, it's definitely a good advertisement for Linux, I suppose, because with Linux you don't have to use any of those sort of systems. And I think it's certainly interesting that there's I believe there is still a couple of ways to bypass this at this point. So, or one or two ways, which I've seen people commenting. If you check the Windows subreddit, there's people making like posts about like still how to bypass it. So I think it's certainly very interesting that this is happening at such a pivotal point when people might be just choosing whether to switch to Linux or not. And I think we'll definitely dive into some of the forum posts that we saw people posting on the forum, because there was a pretty heated discussion happening about like whether switching to Linux is possible, and like, it's certainly a harder process than a lot of people are saying, I think, because not everybody has the technical ability to do it, I would say. And
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's like for me, bro, like for me, in my personal experience, it's never been particularly a technical issue. Like I love using Linux like as my secondary device, and this one of the second many times where I've tried using it as a primary device, and um, I think Linux is an amazing option for folks, who aren't willing to troubleshoot. And yes, there are very beginner-friendly distributions out there, such as like Ubuntu and Fedora, which could definitely level the playing field. I think like one of the users on our forum suggested like amazing links actually that could help someone like switch over. But I do want to emphasize then again, there are a lot of unexpected boundaries when using Linux on a day-to-day basis. I know that a lot of content creators, for example, they're locked in with an Adobe like system. And well, yes, there are certain options like DaVinci or GIMP. Um, it's not necessarily like at the same level. Some folks have mentioned that gaming as a potential issue as well. And while gaming has been amazing on Linux systems so far, like first for me as someone who uses the Steam Deck or has a gaming PC as well at home, like Linux works perfectly fine with the games I play on. But certain users also established that it doesn't really work with certain anti-cheat systems that games play, which is already quite invasive, I would say. Um, so I think at the end of the day, like if something like online account registration is a bit of a deal breaker for you, um, definitely do explore Linux. I think it's an amazing thing to use. But be advised that it might not be always a seamless experience depending on what computer you have. There's a lot of computers and models out there that have amazing Linux support. Others not so much, actually. They're quite infamous for having horrible support. So definitely be careful and definitely like reach out to the community. There's a lot of folks out here who can help you like navigate that transition, and even like devices that aren't traditionally known for having good Linux support. A lot of people have actually able to install like drivers and fixed audio issues, connectivity issues like properly. So like I believe that for the folks who are on the stream, I'm sure y'all have like the technical know-how to configure Linux. But I figured the challenge so far is, can Linux actually work for the average person, for the average layperson, for example, who may not have the technical skills to troubleshoot and they just want a computer that works. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not particularly too sure because I haven't really tried it out with a lot of my family members yet. But what I can definitely do say though is that for someone who ironically does not have a lot of usage cases on their computer, but needs to browse the internet or go on social media, that I think Linux can work perfectly fine, honestly. It's a weird middle ground where, yes, professionals use Linux all the time, and the average person may not have a lot of complex usage cases in the first place, so Linux may work perfectly for them. I guess the issue is kind of like the middle ground, folks who are trying to use their computer for work at home, for example, or people who just need like a working computer for certain usage cases, such as work or leisure. And I guess it's like that weird balance of like, okay, I'm not just going on the internet. I also need to use my computer for work, but I'm not a professional that specializes in like software engineering or the IT world. So it's a bit of a weird balance actually. But do you have any other like thoughts on this, Jordan?
Yeah, so just a quick thing, Kevin. I think your microphone is like scraping against your shirt and making a weird noise.
Oh,
Just a
darn!
heads
I'm so
up.
sorry.
But
Okay,
yes,
I'll
so
lift it up.
I think it's you brought up some good points. I think a lot of people do rely on like software that's Windows only, And in a lot of cases, that's sort of unfeasible for people that need those certain apps. So I think, you can't really recommend it in those cases. But I think, if you don't have, like you said, like you have like a lower usage needs for a computer, then I think it's definitely possible to switch to Linux. But I think we can get definitely into more detail on that topic once we go through some of the forum thread, because I saw some pretty interesting comments that people were making. So definitely stick around for that. But I think we've kind of talked about this for a while now. Is there anything you wanted to add before we move on, Kevin?
Nothing much, but I would say at the end, near the end of this live stream, we'll go in with a few like things that people have said. We can like comment on that for sure. But I think it's good time to cover the next topic, Jordan.
Yes, and I guess this is kind of a change of pace in a lot of ways, because chat control has been sort of a very negative situation for a while, and now we finally have some positive news to do with chat control. So, citizen protest halts chat control, Brea celebrates major victory for digital privacy. So, if you don't know, Patrick Brea is basically one of the lead people spearheading the destruction of chat control, I would say. So if you haven't been following his social media account and his posts, he does very, very good posts on what's happening so you can stay up to date on what's going on. And I think we should take this as certainly a win, but also I think coming from him, we can say this is probably more definite than what we would have expected, because I think there's definitely the case that this can still happen, but I think this is a pretty big win that will probably kill the entire thing. But I'll just quote from the article here. And in a major breakthrough for the digital rights movement, the German government has refused to back EU's controversial chat control regulation yesterday after facing massive public pressure. The government did not take a position on the proposal. This blocks the required majority in the EU Council, derailing the plan to pass the surveillance law next week. So that's kind of interesting, right? We're seeing quite a shift from Germany, because as far as what they said, they were undecided. Originally, they were against it, and then they were undecided, and then they're now just taking another thing. So it's interesting that they're sort of flip-flopping a little bit, but this is
yeah,
sort of go ahead.
It's sort of like I would say kind of like they're, for some reason, they're a lot more hesitant this time. I've noticed. Like if you look at the past times introduced chat control, Germany has always been a very staunch no, but chat control is slowly but surely getting closer to being passed with each proposal. Since 2022, and it's frankly scary. I believe the first time they got passed, Germany was a definite no, and as time passed, they're like, okay, we're considering it. There's a potential compromise here. Maybe we can figure out a way to make the Danish proposal less worse, and that was the stance of the government. But to see the ruling coalition in Germany come out with a statement so close to deadline makes me think that perhaps maybe during their meeting they finally changed their mind on a few things. It seems to me, of course, with chat control getting closer to being passed, and technically it's not yet defeated, right? Denmark has not necessarily admitted defeat yet. They've postponed the final, not necessarily the final decision, more so they want to make another compromise meeting among all the ministers in December. So it's a definite setback for the proponents of chat control, for sure. But we won't really know for sure unless the Danish presidency, or rather their leadership over the Council of the European Union, is over. But it seems like the Danish government really wants chat control, and they'll probably figure out ways to reintroduce chat control in the topic until, of course, they lose, not necessarily lose, but to switch over the presidency to another country, for example, and they may find chat control a less pressing issue, for example. So it's been constantly been reintroduced. It's been constantly been defeated over and over again, and it's getting scarily close to passing. Um, so maybe I feel a little like apathy almost sometimes, because it seems like no matter what we do, they're always going to propose it. But I also want to like encourage that this apathy must be addressed and defeated, because we cannot lose track of what's going on here. We were this close to having track control pass in the European Union, and we got to be very diligent for the years to come, because they will not stop reintroducing it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I know you mentioned a little bit there, but like this isn't actually, so it's not actually killed just yet. As far as like, is that what you were saying? Like, because I'm reading this post here and it says Denmark can attempt another vote in December. So,
Mm.
do you want to kind of expand a little bit on that?
Oh, of course, yeah. So this is as of a day or two ago, like this press statement. Subsequent articles have been like released. For example, like um, in the updates, for example, like that Breyer posted. It's a German language article. It stated that the scheduled vote on October 14th has been canceled, because everyone believed that without German support, the proposal cannot pass at its current time. However, because Denmark leads is the Danish presidency, means that Denmark is currently leading the Council of the European Union, one of the, I guess, one of the several like organizations within the EU that deals with formalizing regulation. And this is one of the final like you know parts of getting a regulation to pass. It passed almost all other things like the European Parliament, for example, and the European Commission. Um, so this council here means like, yes, the actual like check control proposal itself has not been finalized yet. Denmark may try another attempt to reach a compromise with Germany. So that's what this meeting is. Yes, the final vote has been canceled, but it will still be reintroduced. Denmark will still try to push it down, and so there hasn't been a final like decision yet, technically speaking. The only way that this can be shut down formally is if A, Denmark hands the reins to another country as its term expires, or B, um, there's a formal vote and it's officially been defeated with like a minority veto. And it seems to me like, yes, like it seems to me like another strategy by Denmark to get tech control past in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it'll be reduced down a bit, but that's why we should not stop like advocating against it, because just because it's washed down a bit, in the December like meeting doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for everyone. Um, so that's kind of like the weird intricacies of the European Union. I feel it's still like a priority of Denmark to pass it. They obviously failed in this current iteration, but they'll try to do it again before their term expires.
Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, I'm not super up to date on like European politics. So it's definitely interesting to hear how that works exactly. But I think it's really important what you brought up is like this fight is definitely not over because like it says in the you mentioned there was that German article that Breyer posted, and Denmark or the next EU Council presidencies could put up a revised proposal for discussion again. So this isn't killed just yet. It's kind of frustrating that like we keep seeing this just like keep coming back. Like it already kind of came up in 2021 or so, and now it's back again. And there's a possibility for it to come back again, but it's a different proposal. It's not the exact same thing. It's just a slightly modified version, which is kind of frustrating because it feels like every single time this happens, it's sort of like a bit doomsday like. And we're seeing like, a lot of people voicing concerns and they keep bringing it back up again and again and again, trying to push it through, even though obviously nobody wants it. So yeah, it certainly is kind of frustrating. But I think there was this post also that we saw on Mastodon from Meredith Whitaker, who's the CEO of the Signal Foundation. And I thought I'd just read out what she said. She said, "We're so relieved to see Germany reaffirm its position to the dangerous chat control proposal, the one that would mandate mass scanning of communications. Germany's long been a solid champion of privacy, and the news that it was considering backing mass surveillance was alarming." So yeah, it's interesting. There's she had a pretty good rundown of the entire situation. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely check out her Mastodon post. But yeah, I feel like we've kind of covered this. Is there anything else you think we should cover about this topic?
Just one final thing, actually. Remember, like, what we discussed about chat control being potentially washed down or reworded in future proposals by Denmark. And I want to emphasize this. It has been a very consistent theme among previous proposals that failed as well. Initially, what happened was client-based scanning or client-side scanning is what chat control is essentially. It scans all your images, scans all your videos before you send it through an encrypted messenger like WhatsApp, iMessage, or Signal. What they would do essentially is try to water it down so it would be more acceptable by experts, quote unquote, actual computer scientists and security experts. They say, oh no, it's actually upload moderation. We're just monitoring where people are uploading to a service before it gets sent. Obviously, it's functionally the same thing. But what I am very afraid about is that they water it down even more. So instead of upload moderation, as they try to do in the 2024 proposal, they'll say something else like, oh, no. So actually what's going on is like, let's make it so that Apple and Google or whatever, like, OEM will try to scan the actual image first. So I'm not saying it will happen, but that's what my predicting is. They'll try to wash it down to a point where it's trying to be acceptable and reduce liability from encrypted messengers. That's what I'm thinking that will happen, but don't take this for word. But I feel like, we don't need to talk enough about chat control because it's been quite a repeated topic, but very important topic though, I must add. We can now talk about age verification, an unfortunate trend in addition to chat control. In a BBC article, reports that the ID photos of 70,000 users may have been leaked. So you know what Discord is. It's a messaging platform. Some consider it a gamer version of Slack. Others say it's actually a very useful way of communicating with people and friends. Known for a lot of controversies, but we're not here to discuss that actually. What we're here to discuss, however, is recent breach that led to approximately 70,000 Discord users who've contacted customer support services and filed tickets. They all had their official age verification documents, like photo IDs, leaked in a cyber attack. Now, note that this cyber attack has not targeted Discord itself. It targeted, the third-party service provider. I believe it's Zendesk, but I'll just read the article verbatim. The leaked data may involve personal information, partial credit card details, and messages that were exchanged with Discord's customer service agents, the San Francisco-based company says. No full credit card details, passwords, or messages or activities beyond conversations with Discord's customer support agents were leaked, the firm said. All impacted users have been contacted, and Discord is working with law enforcement to investigate the matter, it added. The platform said it has revoked the customer support provider's access to the system that was targeted in the breach. Discord did not name the third-party company involved. A representative from Zendesk, a customer service software provider for Discord, told the BBC that its systems had not been compromised and that the breach that's a typo by BBC, was not caused by a vulnerability within its platform. Some online commentators have claimed that the data breach was bigger than Discord has revealed. A spokesperson said that this is not accurate. But if you notice online, though, a lot of these online commentators have cited supposed messages from the hacker group itself. And supposedly the breach itself was more harmful than what Discord has claimed. I can't comment on rumors and speculation. What I can comment, however, is that your age verification documents are not safe. The reason why we campaigned against age verification is not because for some reason we want children to be harmed. It's because it's inherently insecure. It's not like a bouncer in a bar could have your photo ID and store it forever, obviously. However, with a third-party service providers that claim to do authentication, that claim to store your ID, your files properly, most of the time they can't. You can have any platform out there, like Instagram, Google, Discord, and they may claim to have excellent security practices, but we can't really verify that amongst a quote-unquote supply chain of any other third-party companies to make contract with. Discord cannot feasibly maintain these documents by themselves. They obviously need to work with other companies as well for customer service or for verifying the age from IDs themselves. So I think this is the first of many incidents that will happen where people's photos IDs will be leaked by these hackers because these third-party service providers do not have the resources necessary to secure them. It's clear that these age verification mandates has been a disaster, and I'm honestly really afraid what's going to come because so far we already know what's like for the accounts, passwords, social security numbers, phone numbers, emails being leaked. That has led to a huge increase of phishing attempts. But with photo IDs though being leaked online, I don't know what that could potentially cause, but based that on the fact that a lot of photo IDs are used for a lot of important things, such as government services, it could lead to a lot of potential implications to come. But yeah, Jordan, are you also scared about this? I know that Australia has a lot of age verification laws as well. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we do like on Discord. I haven't actually received it yet. I deleted my account like recently actually. I had an account for one reason. Anyway, it's kind of frustrating when platforms not platforms, sorry, communities kind of force you into using Discord, and it's very much like if you're into like any sort of gaming communities, basically it's the only platform that a lot of these like communities use, which is extra frustrating. And I think it's kind of interesting. You mentioned here, I remember you said a representative from Zendesk told the BBC that its systems had not been compromised. So I think an important thing to remember with this is it doesn't actually need to be a compromise of anyone's systems. This can all be down to like human error. Some person in the company had their credentials breached and access was granted that way. So like it's not always down to like a very low chance of, vulnerability or whatever like that. It's actually much more common that it's like through human error and having all these people's information stored in like a customer service software. We see it happen all the time. I remember I got an email recently from Cloudflare, and they recently had their customer service system hacked. So it's very common that like these platforms, even though they do have a secure internal system for like accounts and all that sort of stuff, it's the third-party providers that they use that have less focus on security. And I reckon in this case, it was actually someone who had access to more than they needed to. For instance, like there's the idea of like security by having less, like as minimum permission as possible, basically, to make sure that you don't have like everyone having access to every single ticket that was ever created on the customer service platform. And I think it sounds like either someone really high up in the company who had access to everything when they probably didn't need to, got their account breached or something like that. And I think that's where a lot of cases in these companies, it's very irresponsible to have so much information stored in a customer service system. And like you said, this is like due to like the age verification stuff, requesting people's IDs on customer service tickets, that there's no like, what are the restrictions on that? Like, when is that data going to be deleted? Obviously, it doesn't seem to be deleted at all. They've got 70,000 users had their IDs leaked. So it's kind of frustrating. I think in a lot of cases, we are definitely against this in its totality. We don't really want any sort of privacy related version of this to go through. We just want no age verification because the whole process is kind of problematic for people that want anonymity on a platform, and especially like Discord. It's mainly used by gamers and like a lot of community members on different like niche communities have like Discord servers and sort of things. And I'm kind of confused as to why exactly I know the way that Discord works. I believe that if they believe that you're underage, they'll actually request your ID. But that's down to like sort of AI algorithms deciding whether you're a child or not. So it's interesting to sort of deal with that whole situation because there's people who rely on those accounts and they basically are forced into providing their ID to continue accessing those communities. And especially when it's like when it's handing over your ID to a system that could basically store it forever, it's very hard to like defend that, I guess. And
Yeah, it's
yeah.
horrible. Like I think, I'm looking in the chat right now, and Jonah is listening from that road trip. So hi, Jonah. And something that I really found what he said was amazing was, Discord sucks. Forums are so much better. So if you do want a Discord alternative and want to go back to the old age of internet where people actually communicate in forums, and have actual conversations, highly recommend Privacy Guides. Amazing forum. Anyways, back on the topic of Discord. I think it's complicated because there are a lot of very worrying things with having a lot of children on Discord. I think historically there's been a lot of unfortunate instances with children being radicalized and having access to things they shouldn't have on Discord, and it's a very unfortunate vector for a lot of horrible things. This episode, I don't want to forget about that. The issue, however, is responsibly securing age verification documents. All right. At the end of the day, you can never trust any third party. If you look through any privacy policy, be it Proton or Discord, it doesn't matter how good the privacy policy is. There's always some sort of clause saying we're not responsible for any data that is processed by third party companies. And almost every company will have some form of third party liaisoning for customer support or whatever, BS things out there. And it's very concerning. So I don't know no one really released privacy policies nowadays. I think everyone should, but they made it really hard. But next time you're using a service, make sure to double check which third-party processors or rather companies they're using, and try to see, okay, is this third-party processor sufficiently minimizing the data collected? But yeah, I think that's all I have to add on the Discord fiasco. Jordan, do you have any other last minute thoughts as well?
I mean, yeah, there's not really much we can say here with things you can do. I guess actionable advice right now is definitely try and lock down your IDs, because I know it depends very much on your jurisdiction, but I know in Australia, I don't really know what it's like in the US, but once you've received this breach notification, you can actually go to an official government agency and tell them, I've had my identity stolen, or I'm at risk of having my identity stolen because my ID was leaked. Can I please get a new one and invalidate the old one? That's 100% what you should be doing right now. You should have received an email specifically from Discord if your information was affected. So if you did get that email, make sure to immediately get that locked down. And I would also just be careful and look out for any accounts that get taken over. It's possible because in a lot of cases, a lot of accounts are restricted. The access is restricted based on your login information. But if you do have somebody's ID, you can actually bypass that. So I think that's definitely an important thing to remember, because having your ID out there, it definitely opens you up to have your accounts taken over, even if you have good second, two-factor authentication and all of that. But there's not really a whole lot you can do, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a very sad situation, especially because a lot of those people were probably required, their ID was required for a reason outside of their control. So it's very unfortunate. But I guess with that being said, do we want to move into, do we have any more articles here, or is that everything we've covered?
Oh yeah, we have one final article. I can take this one actually, because it was added quite recently. I believe the article was released today. But spyware maker NSO Group confirms acquisition by U.S. investors. And one of the first few live streams I did, I previously discussed a very concerning trend where the U.S. has the most amount of investment into the targeted spyware industry. I'm talking venture capitals, firms, and private equity. And according to TechCrunch, the NSO Group has confirmed to them that an unknown group of U.S. investors have acquired a company being led by this Hollywood producer named Robert Simmons. I don't know much about him, But what I can do tell you is that, you know, the NSO Group has repeatedly in this past been acquired by various private equity firms, but its core mission still remains the same. I think 10 years ago, it was purchased by a US private equity firm. It didn't switch over to a European-based private equity firm to get the original like founders of this organization back to leadership. And now it's been purchased again by another US group. We don't know anything about it so far, but what we do know is that they'll still remain regulated by Israeli government, especially the Ministry of Defense, still beholden to any sort of like export control treaties, since targeted spyware is considered a dual-use technology under the Western arrangement. So this means that, of course, every time that NSO Group does sell its software, it's beholden to regulations because it's considered kind of like a weapon of sorts. It's like trying to sell fertilizer to like another country. You need to like be aware of what's going on to make sure it's not used improperly. And everything still remains the same. What is different, however, is like the timing. Of course, not only has the US became the number one investor in the target spyware industry, they've also had a huge transition towards actually fully adopting and embracing it. I believe recently, like ICE, which is the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency that we have, they had a partnership with a similar company to deploy, I believe, Paragon against potential suspected criminals. I don't know too much about it, but it seems to me that the NSO Group, which has historically been a target of U.S. sanctions, is now officially owned by American interests. And it's clear that in the past, despite recent sanctions against the NSO Group for participating in the assassination of a journalist named Jamal Khashoggi, it appears that all of that has been forgiven and ignored. And now current U.S. policy is to embrace targeted spyware for use by law enforcement. It's incredibly scary to know like that, though. I don't know why would anyone invest in such a morally black company, but it's sad. It's rather kind of depressing, but it's clear that there has to be some morals involved here, and it's clear that people only see money and not necessarily the fact that the privacy of innocent people are being compromised here. But yeah, I think like this is probably the final like story we'll probably discuss, since this is a repeat of a story that we talked about like a few streams ago. But Jordan, do you have any like comments, concerns about this?
No, I think this is certainly kind of interesting because isn't NSO Group the company that develops the Pegasus spyware? Is that correct?
Yes. Pegasus was used to target Jamal Khashoggi, a huge story a few years ago, where the Saudi journalist was assassinated by the Saudi government in Turkey while trying to like process like a marriage, I believe, in the embassy in Turkey. Essentially, Saudi agents deployed Pegasus, not necessarily on Khashoggi's phone, but through his associates, friends, his maid, his wife. They all had Pegasus installed on their devices, which is a very critical attack vector when trying to target someone. Oftentimes, the target itself usually have secured the devices, but there's always tiny things like having a shared iCloud folder, for example, or album with your partner or your friends, and that being a potential attack vector to infect your device. So I believe that's what happened like all those years ago, and NSO Group had to go underground, almost not underground, but also like had go. They can't really do a lot of things. They got so much media attention, and they got sanctions like levied upon them by the U.S. itself. And now it appears like the NSO Group has been purchased by these investors, right? It's clear to me there's a change in U.S. policy, but also in change in how these firms are viewed right now, which is I think is incredibly scary. But
Yeah.
I believe that another thing to add to as well is that the NSO Group has been a target of a lot of lawsuits, especially by WhatsApp and Apple, and they had to pay quite a lot of money to the company and to the victims. And I believe that this purchase was an opportunity to like gain some fund for the NSO Group to survive, which is kind of malicious if you think about it. Like, they've finally been made liable for all these damages, but they received some last minute funding by being acquired by these investors, and now they can finally pay off WhatsApp and other victims. So it's really sad to see like this happen for sure.
Yeah, I think it is also a really interesting quote that was in this article from John Scott Railton, a senior researcher at Citizen Lab. So as far as I'm aware, Citizen Lab does some really good like research and like studies into spyware and that sort of stuff, like military spyware. And this person said, NSO is a company with a long history of going against American interests and supporting the hacking of American officials. In what world can such a person be trusted to properly oversee a company like NSO Group? So yeah, I think they just really don't want this company to be associated with the US, and they don't want to support this acquisition. Rightly so, because yeah, it could be used against American citizens, and as far as I'm aware, that would be extremely against like a lot of the constitutional protections you have. So that's very concerning, especially because there seems to be quite a lot of like uh, political turmoil going on in the US. So
Yeah, like I don't know. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I can't comment on whether that's legal or not for American citizens to be targeted by spyware like this. But what I can confirm is that regardless of what's legal or not, most likely things will happen. An American citizen will have Paragon or Pegasus or some variation of those spyware on their phones, and we ask where does it belong to, who actually infected your computer, and I think just a prediction, maybe do a big like court case about this in the future, but we don't really know anything until we see it, and it isn't really much we can do right now except if you do believe that you'll be targeted spyware, pun, be very careful in the near future, especially in the US, because law enforcement has started adopting it. Um, but yeah, Jordan, any final comments about the
yeah,
story?
so actually I think there was like a really good kind of, I guess we can like talk about actionable stuff. I know it's
Mm,
still very uncommon to be targeted by this sort of spyware, but when we talk about like defending yourself from this sort of thing, I don't know if you
mm,
saw, but Jonah did a great video the other week and also an article about Apple's memory tagging enforcement. So that's like another protection that people can use to basically protect themselves from these sort of military spywares. Lockdown mode is another thing, and yep, Graphene OS is also with memory tagging enforcement is also great for that. But I think it's really unfortunate that this is sort of becoming almost, I would say, almost normalized, which is really
mm,
unfortunate. Like a lot of police and sort of things being able to use these sort of products. Like I know we've seen like Grey Key and a couple of these other like phone cracking systems become like sort of adopted in like police agencies
mm.
around America. It's very unfortunate to see, and uh, if you believe you'll be targeted by this sort of thing, I think it's definitely important to make sure you take the right steps to protect yourself. Especially because it does seem like the political landscape in the US is quite in quite a bit of turmoil at the moment.
Mm. Yeah, I think those are like amazing like remediation steps. Jonah did write an amazing article on this, and we'll send it over like in a newsletter following this if you want to read it. We completely forgot to spotlight this early in the stream. My apologies on that. But yes, the recent iPhone 17 lineup has MTE support, and you know offers excellent, better protection against potential instances of targeted spyware. Um, but yeah, I think this is great to move on to any trending forum post. I believe we can move on to like the forum post actually about Windows 11 because there's quite a lot of responses actually here.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's dive straight into some of these questions and comments that people have been leaving um, on this popular forum thread. So do you want to? Are there any comments that stick out to you, Kevin, right now, or
Yeah, like I'm just gonna summarize what went on, but a user by name Purple Dime, made an initial post spotlighting the article that we covered by Windows Central. Give us a rundown of what happened essentially. A Windows update removing your ability to bypass Microsoft account restrictions. And essentially what happened is a lot of users on the forum were split between advising Linux as the main source of protecting yourself when choosing your operating system, and just trying to fix Windows, trying to circumvent these things and hardening it. And it appears that there's a lot of folks who have very strong feelings on adopting Linux, and it could kind of devolve a little bit, I believe, into a lot of very concerning like at-home attacks among Shaler, but I believe those have been removed. But essentially, there's been a lot of interesting conversations, for example, by Hank, for example, who stated, if you go down, what's the problem with creating an account? These requirements only apply to Pro and Home editions, while Enterprise-based editions don't require any bypasses and offer the option to create a local account. I mean, Pro and Home editions don't have the option to disable telemetry, so forcing the creation of an account won't change anything. Account is also required for BitLocker to work properly, which is enabled by default in Windows 11. I heard that some people lost their data because they didn't save their encryption keys and didn't have a linked Microsoft account where the keys are stored after logging in. And that happened to me, actually, funny enough. The reason why I ended up installing Linux recently this past weekend was I made the amazing decision of not having the recovery keys stored outside my computer. And I did not know that I forgot that Windows updates tend to bork your computer sometimes. But in a reply, Anonymous 420 said, I can't speak on the technical side of things, but I still don't follow your logic. Are you saying that only on the condition that Pro and Home can disable telemetry is it bad to require an account? This isn't a zero-sum game. A widely used majority market share tech corporation forcing account creation for operating system does change something, the techno-cultural landscape. What's at stake is the current state of affairs. It is not. You say, so what if they require an account? Does that change anything? Because blah, blah, blah. In response, I say, well, isn't it bad that we can disable telemetry? And then the user said, I agree with you that it is a problem if users expect BitLocker to work properly without an online account when in fact does not. But would you agree with me that Microsoft does not have to develop BitLocker or their operating system this way, such that users encounter these issues? Why is it that we cannot disable telemetry? Why is it that BitLocker cannot work like any other FTE algorithm? Why is it that we have to link our encryption keys within Microsoft account and so on? And I agree with this user 100%. That someone has faced those issues entirely. It's like, why are there tiny things that have to any caveats, There's nothing. Why do you have to force an online account? Why do you force this and that? It's frankly absurd and very unfriendly. And I think just because, yes, you can have maximal security on Windows, by enabling BitLocker, and it allows you to associating the recovery keys with that account. This doesn't necessarily mean it's a good practice to do. It's a horrible practice by a big tech company. But Jordan, I think you wanted to mention something.
Yes. So I did want to say, I know there's people discussing sort of why can you use BitLocker without an online account? I'm not sure why people are saying that you can't. I've personally found it's perfectly doable to just store when you set up BitLocker itself, it'll actually give you an option to either store an online Microsoft account or store a local file. So if you do want to use a local file instead, you do get the option. So I'm not sure why they were saying that particularly, because I've done that a couple of times and I didn't use a Microsoft account and it let me save it locally on a separate drive though. So I'm not sure exactly why people are saying that, but I do think it's sort of unfriendly to not allow you to use an operating system in the way that you want. And I think even if you do have to make an account and link it, it does sort of get linked pretty deeply in the operating system. There's all sorts of things that just automatically start sending data for no reason and linked to that specific account. So I don't think we should be sort of pushing for people to make aliased accounts and that sort of thing. I think we should be trying to push people to avoid the accounts entirely, because that's just an extra bunch of data being collected and specifically tied to your identity. So I can't really recommend creating a Microsoft account specifically to set up Windows and then removing it, because it still does get saved in certain registry inside Windows, even if you remove the account. So I just think that there's ways to avoid linking an account, and I think people are still going to keep finding ways to bypass it, even though they're continually closing things. And I'm going to say try and do that if you can, if you have to use Windows in every single way. I know there was like a bunch of other comments that people were making around like switching to Linux, whether you should switch to Linux or whether you should stick with Windows 11. Why are you switching to Windows 11? Why don't you just switch to Linux? I think this is sort of a tricky conversation to have, right? Because some people rely on software that's only available on Windows. Some people rely on, I think specifically gaming is still not at a point where like a lot of people who primarily use their computer for gaming purposes can really switch to a different operating system. So it's kind of a tough sell in those cases. I think it's going to be tricky because, you know, there's a lot of extra hardware things that aren't quite ready, like HDR, I don't think is really working on Linux. There's a bunch of other like proprietary, like NVIDIA G-Sync, and I think that might work on Linux now actually. But
Yeah, I think NVIDIA Open, those drivers, like, it's been recently been developed and it works pretty well, I heard. Um, I haven't tried it out myself yet, but I heard that recent features like DLSS 4 doesn't really work as well. Maybe it did. I don't know. Haven't tried it. Don't take anything I say for granted. But what I can do say though is other versions of DLSS does work. Ray tracing sort of works. It's not that bad. I guess the main issues that people are worried about is if they were to play like MMOs and RPGs, like League of Legends, anti-cheat systems, like those are really annoying. But I think like the best solution here, since like, you know, everyone is arguing to recommend Linux or not, is to just like maybe instead of like downplaying a few things that people may have, like genuine usage cases, maybe we can try to get them to slowly compartmentalize their life across different, you know, computers, for example. Yeah, yes, it's expensive to buy another computer. We get it. But is there anything wrong with, for example, having a secondary laptop you use for personal reasons that's on Linux and having a work laptop for with Windows, for example? Maybe you can dual boot, for example, dual booting and using Linux mostly for everything that isn't strictly exclusive to Windows. I think that's a really good compromise. And maybe in the future, people will realize, okay, I don't really care about League of Legends and its anti-cheat system anymore. I will fully switch to Linux. And it works for a lot of people. That's what I did. I personally realized a lot of the Windows exclusive features didn't really matter for me. That was what made the switch more bearable over the past few years. So I do say though, it's a very slow transition. Switching an operating system is incredibly tough. Switching to Linux is a huge transition if it's just Ubuntu or Fedora. So I really want to like emphasize that empathy is really important when you're trying to get people to switch over. Any option, anything, not just like operating system. You will need to make some compromises. Maybe some will still need to use Windows for the things that they need to work on. But at the end of the day, just because there is a solution doesn't mean that solution works for everyone involved. And we want to make sure that everyone is safe and secure, even Windows users.
100%, yeah. It's important that everyone deserves privacy. Everyone deserves security. That's an incredibly important like sentiment to have. I think there's sort of this one person who ended up they made a bunch of kind of sort of inflammatory posts, and they sort of weren't having that same level of empathy that you're talking about right now. And I think it's interesting that there's sort of people that think you can't really do anything with any other operating system. You have to be using Linux. Personally, we do like sort of production for privacy guides, like all the content that gets uploaded onto YouTube. This live stream, it's not done on Linux. I'm sorry, everybody. It's been a lie. I guess I don't know. I don't know if that's surprising or not. But we do need to access sort of professional level tools, and Linux just doesn't have those tools yet. So, you know, I think it's perfectly fine to do like sort of work activities on other operating systems. In this instance, I'm using Mac OS on a MacBook, and I think, you know, you have to make compromises. But I think if you compartmentalize some of your activities, like Kevin was saying, like either dual booting or like having a separate device for a specific purpose, like work, you can definitely do quite a lot there. And personally, even when it comes to gaming, I think some people unfortunately play games that require sort of these invasive anti-cheat software, and it's sort of unfortunate that these companies are pushing for these kernel level anti-cheats, because I think in a lot of cases, a lot of games are actually supported. At least I think it really depends what games you play. For instance, like I'm quite into like MMO RPGs like Guild Wars 2 and like Final Fantasy 14 and World of Warcraft, but I think those sort of games have zero issues because they don't have those kernel level anti-cheats. So I think it's worth at least looking into which games you play, see if they actually are supported, and see what's available, because I think we are getting to a point where a lot of games without anti-cheat are supported and they run quite well. So I don't think it's worth completely writing off, especially if you're a gamer. But I think if your main thing is like you want to jump on like the latest releases as soon as they come out and like get it working 100%, I don't think Linux is going to be for you. But I think in a lot of cases it's still very possible to play a lot of stuff that's coming out. I know Silksong was definitely working on Linux from launch, so you know there's differences now, and I think we're in a better spot for Linux gaming as well. But I don't know if it's worth like going through this whole thread. I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of what was said there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think at the end of the day, everyone deserves, to find a solution that works for them. And if they need to use Windows and Linux or Mac OS and Linux or just Linux, whatever, it works, And as long as we get people more conscious of privacy, that's saying that you have to do this, you have to do that in order to be private. I think that's a fallacy by itself, But I think in order to get people to switch to Linux more, let's slowly ease them into it. Like if you do want to consider switching to Linux, we're always here to help you. I'm more than happy to help you because it took me a while to get to this point, but I love it so far. Always happy to do so. But if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. All right. Don't force a bad solution for you if it's a better solution for another use case. But yeah, I think that's enough to say about this thread. Is there like any other like thread you want to talk about specifically?
I didn't see, like, I feel like this was definitely this post went up on the 8th of October and it's already at 83 posts. Like, I feel like this kind of blew up. So, I mean, yeah, there's actually quite, just looking at this, there's actually more than that. A lot of the posts are hidden. So, because there was a bit of heat going on there.
Moderation,
Yeah, Kevin's on top of that. But I think it's definitely interesting. It's an interesting topic that I think a lot of people are probably going to be discussing. I think I would probably, especially if you have like family members who are still using Windows 10, or you have friends that are still using Windows 10, I would definitely try and have the conversation with them, like get them to either upgrade or do something, because I think being stuck on Windows 10, as far as I'm aware, there might be an extended level of updates coming, but I think I would probably try and get on top of that before Microsoft does something to extend that, because yeah, you don't want to be running Windows without security updates.
Yeah, I think at that point you might as well install the virus yourself,
Yeah, it's like running Windows 7 in 2026 or whatever.
I heard that the market share for Windows 7 went up to 10%. I'm not sure if the source is accurate. I read it somewhere, but I heard that a lot of people are switching to Windows 7 as a protest. I don't know if we want to like recommend that. But what I can say though is that Windows 7, or at least the look of it, can be replicated easily on Linux. I feel like that's the most popular like format that people love, like having their desktop environment look like Windows 7. And it's very doable on Linux, especially Mint, for example. So amazing distro. Used it a few times a few years ago. Still have fond memories of it.
This is
I think
this is sort of extremely off topic right now, but I noticed you mentioned before earlier. Are you comfortable sharing like what distro did you end up choosing to like switch to Linux with?
I used a bunch over the past like few years. Right now, like because the fact my laptop has horrible Linux compatibility. It's an Asus laptop, so it has a GPU. So horrible combo. That's why I initially installed Windows 10, because I didn't want to do like the mess of like Optimus and all that. But I ended up using CatchyOS. Apparently that's a bit of a meme right now. Unfortunately, it's just like the newest drivers did implement it was only really like upstreamed within the CatchOS kernel. Basically, what I'm trying to say is like any other distro, like Ubuntu, for example, like it may not support my laptop, the Stacy laptop, like fully yet, but there's certain workarounds to essentially like, you know, have the driver system and you need to support it. And for me, if I wanted like secure boot enabled, I had to use CatchOS because CatchOS was the only like distro that would allow me to use secure boot while also having those drivers like for my laptop. If I were to use, for example, like use Fedora Secure Blue, or if I were to use like a random Arch like installation, I would need to like use a custom like kernel, and that would essentially like invalidate secure boot. It's not possible to do so, I believe. I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not. I haven't tried it. I didn't want to risk it. I don't have time for that. Like I'm a student. I work as well. So, but using CatchOS is pretty simple, at least for like newer computers. Not this is not an advertisement, by the way. This is what I use. But if it don't feel pressure to use CatchOS, like there's a lot of amazing distributions out there that may work better for you as a newer user. So if you have a desktop computer or an older laptop, for example, you may find Ubuntu that works perfect for you. Fedora works amazing as well. We as an organization recommend Fedora and Arch-based distros because of faster updates. But for beginners, though, and if you're a little more technical, I think Fedora works perfect for you. I don't think we recommend Ubuntu, but I mean, if your threat model is just privacy, not necessarily security, I'm going to say anything wrong with using Ubuntu if you're like afraid of Fedora for some reason. But Fedora is definitely the most like beginner-friendly distro that we recommend, and I heavily advise you to use that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I've personally never really seen this Catchy OS.
CatchOS, yeah, it's apparently it's like Arch, but it runs very smoothly and fast and has the latest drivers or something. Apparently it's a meme, but I don't know.
Wow, it's pretty catchy, you could say.
Ha 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 ha. So
Yeah.
funny.
Anyway, but I think it's there's definitely another one that I think Privacy Guides does recommend NixOS, which I'm a big fan of. So I don't know if that's another thing, but it's a more of like advanced, specialized Linux distro, or I guess it's technically not a Linux distro, but yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of great options, and I think it's really down to like what you find works best for you. And I think in this case, yeah, CatchOS seems like it's doing everything you need. So I mean, that's solid. And Arch Linux, based on Arch Linux.
Number one distro. CatchOS is number one, or was number one on DistroWatch. So a lot of people are searching it up apparently.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, I need to stop advertising. It's horrible. Anyways, okay, let me just look at the chat. Jonah asked, did the market share for Windows 7 go up in absolute numbers, or enough people switching away from 10, 11 to alternatives that 7 is getting a higher percentage? I have no idea personally. I don't have the exact article like in my head, but I vaguely recall 7 going up to 10% market share, which is terrifying, honestly. Like, please, like, just use Linux instead. It's okay. Like, yeah, at that point, like, why? Just install the virus yourself. But yeah, I do know that Windows 10 ending support really did annoy a lot of people, and maybe that will encourage people to switch over. Windows 7 is a horrible idea. Don't do that. Listen, I miss Windows 7 too. I get it. I had a lot of fun memories of it, but please don't do that.
Yeah, no, it's certainly very nostalgic. Like I've seen like images of it going around now, and yeah, it's definitely like I don't know if we're during my childhood, that was like the operating system that everything was like installed on that, and it's like really quite nostalgic, I would say. It's sort of interesting though that like people are still using it even though it's like it died in 2020, like it's no longer receiving updates. But I feel like that was like the last good Windows version before it became like absolutely terrible in Windows 10. They started adding ads in the start menu and like all this other like horrible stuff that literally no one was asking for. So it's tricky. But I feel like we've kind of went over some of the interesting forum threads this week. So let's dive into some of the Q&A questions, and we'll answer some of the questions on the forum thread from our members first, if we have any. So let's have a look at that.
Yeah, I'm looking at the first post by Johnny Gossamer, a privacy wizard and very regular in the forum. So thank you for posting again. I hope you're listening.
Just to double check though, are there any members that have left a comment, just so we make sure we get those first?
Members. I don't know which one. I don't really see that, honestly. Is there like a members only like thread?
There's usually a little badge next to someone's name. Let's have a look here.
I don't see any members, no.
Doesn't look like we have any this week.
That's no members. Sad. Maybe there was like maybe one day. But yeah. So Johnny Gossamer mentioned that just to summarize what he said, he wants to drive us the point of moving to Linux for people who get sick and tired of Microsoft abusing them, and that there's almost literally no reason to not move to Linux from Windows anymore. The only friction point is that average person still be unsure and scared of doing so. And then he then proceeded to cite a bunch of like links from Mudahar. Interesting. So I did a video about his commentator named Mudahar saying you can now run a Windows app on Linux, and then Winboat itself, which my first time hearing about it actually, which apparently allows you to run Windows app on Linux with seamless integration. GitHub repo for WinApps, which will allow you to run Microsoft Office and Adobe, and then fmstrat/WinApps. Yeah, more GitHub repos. And then wants us to explore Linux distros like Mint, Papa OS, Zorin, and Ubuntu. And then he argues that Fedora is easy to use, almost as anything is done with the GUI. And then there's always computer repair shops that you can go to for any initial support with installing Linux or trying to like fix your new or aging computer. So I think we kind of covered almost everything like about switching to Linux from Windows. First time I heard about Winboat though, so I need to do a lot more research for actually commenting on that. Sounds very interesting though. Maybe we can experiment with it. Maybe like do a little review of it in the future. I don't know. think. But what I do say though is like, at least with computer repair shops, I haven't heard of that before, at least in the US. Jordan, do computer repair shops in Australia, have they done a lot of Linux stuff too, or no?
There's like someone in some of the communities that I frequent, and they do like stuff in the US. There's someone that does that, but I know it's definitely I know a lot of repair shops are somewhat more what do you call it? They don't want to do that because there's so much. I think this applies to in a lot of cases, like software developers and all sorts of things. They don't want to support Linux because it is so fragmented. And I think it starts becoming a bit of a problem to support it, just because there's so many different like spins of Linux and they all do things slightly differently, and it just makes troubleshooting the entire process kind of frustrating. So I'd say a lot of computer shops are probably a little bit apprehensive to support Linux, but it's certainly good if some are. And I think unfortunately, like in a lot of cases, these repair shops, they're trying to make as much money as possible, and they're going to try and they're going to try and push buying a new laptop instead of upgrading to Linux, which is unfortunate, but it's sort of how this economy works. And I think it's a shame because there's a lot of computers, like I've got this this ThinkPad. It's from 2008, and it's running OpenBSD. It's running great. Like I think it's kind of a shame that like old tech that's in a lot of cases not supported by Windows 11 is perfectly fine for running Linux or any lightweight operating systems. And in a lot of cases, I think it's perfectly fine for a lot of people. Like I've got another computer. It's like I think it's a Skylake CPU, and it's not supported by Windows 11. Works perfectly fine on Linux. So it's really unfortunate that we're going to see a whole bunch of e-waste just because Microsoft has these somewhat reason. I feel like I understand why they're doing it, but it's like it is kind of creating a huge amount of e-waste, and I think Microsoft is like particularly like known for being kind of terrible when it comes to this sort of stuff. Like they just sort of like planned obsolescence. So it's really unfortunate, but it would be great if more repair shops were offering that service.
I think maybe this user was referring to a bunch of the European-based computer repair shops. I know that there is definitely a movement in Germany specifically where a lot of computer repair shops are open that will support this Linux transition. So instead of like, oh, buy a new laptop, buy this part, then maybe like, oh hey, install Linux on this, by the way, reduce e-waste. So maybe like there is actually a good movement of like peer repair shops actually offering this support, but I'm not sure if they're particularly common outside of Europe. I know you mentioned that there may be some in Australia and like the US, but I think the vast majority of like peer repair shops, like for example, like when I think of peer repair shop, I think of Best Buy Geek Squad. Maybe that doesn't mean anything to any international folks out here, but in America, I do not imagine Geek Squad recommending Linux any way, shape, or form. I don't know. It's just very corporate, But maybe you're a smaller like repair shop. Maybe there's a person there that maybe informally like very passionate about Linux, and it may actually help you with that. So I say, give it a shot. Who knows? Maybe like there's someone who's really passionate about this and willing to help you, but it's not necessarily a strictly like universal thing, though, I'd say. But yeah, I think it's time to go to the next question. Tired Muppet says, if I have Windows 11 installed on USB from a month ago using the previous method to override and do a local account method, would that still work? And would updating or disabling that feature require me to create a Windows account? I am very interested in Linux. I wonder how to ensure security, as what I've learned thus far is that security is an issue. Thank you for keeping us all up to date. Appreciate that, Tired Muppet. So as for your first question, it's complicated, but I believe that since this is currently like an insider update, it's not been pushed yet to the mainstream, meaning that you can still use existing methods so far have not been patched yet. So if you are seeking to use Windows and you need it for work, you can't use any alternatives. Best time to install it is now, or else in a couple months you may lose that ability. But be advised that if you just search up on Reddit or any other like social media out there, like you will find like alternatives. Just keep in mind that it needs to be updated though, so there's a chance that may not work. There's a chance that could work. It will require a lot of troubleshooting though, but people will discover methods to do so. So no harm there. And as for your second point, you're concerned that security is an issue for Linux, and I mean it depends though. Like I said, like main reason why people switch to Linux is privacy. It doesn't contain any telemetry by default. Most distros are open source and therefore audible, so we can tell whether or not like something is harmful or not. As for security, I think you're referring to like the security model, especially in terms of like access controls. And if I remember properly, there are some concerns with, for example, if you do have a malware that specifically is targeted at Linux, Linux doesn't have a lot of like sandboxing enabled by default, and that's why we enable like we tend to like recommend distributions like, for example, Secure Blue. Since it's a Fedora-based distro, is it a distro or is it like just an installation image? I forgot what it is. Secure Blue
it's a bootable container, technically, but yeah, it's we can say it's a distro for the purposes of brevity, I suppose.
Yeah, distro, whatever, distro. It's a distro now. But essentially, what it is, like because it's Fedora, it's semi-rolling. It's as close as you can get to like having the latest updates. So you'll be patched for many 0 days, and it includes like some sandboxing by default. I forgot, is SE Linux, right?
Yes, it does. It has SE Linux like enforcing, so it's definitely like in a lot of ways it has extra policies that they've also implemented as well. I think it's certainly an interesting option, but I think if you're new to Linux, I don't think you need to jump straight into Secure Blue or even like Cubes OS or any of these like security focused Linux well, I guess Cubes OS is technically not a Linux distro either. But
Zen.
a Zen distribution, I suppose. But I think if you're new to Linux, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think as long as you go with like any of our recommendations, like Fedora or I think Secure, what do you call it? Silverblue, sorry. I would say Silverblue is a little bit more complex, but Fedora is definitely a good starting point, I think, for a lot of people. And if you don't like the GNOME desktop, there's like KDE Plasma, there's XFC, there's a whole bunch of different spins that you can try out if you don't like GNOME, which a lot of Windows users don't seem to like. I would recommend KDE Plasma if you like the Windows sort of look.
I do recall like a really heated topic about a Windows guide, for example, how hard, and some folks mentioned that Linux is not that secure, and so on and so forth. Here's a blog describing its vulnerabilities, and I think we should probably acknowledge that yes, Linux by default isn't the most secure thing in the world, but I feel like considering your threat model is important. If you just don't want trackers and you don't want any telemetry, Linux is amazing, and a lot of apps includes by default. Don't have any of that tracking or online account registration account requirement at all. But if you are concerned about a state actor trying to target you with spyware, for example, ironically, Linux does still work. I would say Cube's OS amazing for it. Zen distribution, whatever. Tails, for example, is really good for anonymity, anti-forensics, even though it is a Linux distro. And if you do want to maximize security, I guess a lot of folks recommend Mac OS laptops because of the security model, which is very robust. Maybe that is true. I can't confirm whether or not that's true or not. I don't have a lot of knowledge of this specifically, but what can I say is usually people, when they install Linux, do so to minimize any tracking involved here. So let's not conflate security and privacy here. If you really want to maximize security, yeah, you can use a Mac laptop and have separate laptop for Tails or Cubes, for example. Maybe that's the best of both worlds. But don't worry too much about security per se. If your concerns are privacy first, definitely consider getting multiple laptops or computers with different usage purposes. I think that's the best way to kind of synthesize everything together. Yeah. Jordan, do you notice any other questions that we should probably talk about? I think
Yes.
there's a question by air_work. Kevin, what do you mean by children being radicalized on Discord? Okay, I think I misspoke. I don't mean to say Discord is targeting the kids. It's I think what I was trying to refer to is that there is a history of certain communities being targeting children. You can probably do this research yourself, because I think anything related to that not very YouTube friendly, I'd say. But just because a few communities are bad doesn't mean that Discord itself is a problem. I just want to emphasize that I misspoke there. I guess there's a lot of at least emphasis on recognizing that maybe a problem has some issues, but necessarily doesn't mean we should implement age verification universally, for example. I think the solution is worse than the problem by quite a lot. But yeah, Jordan, do you notice anything in the chat that you want to cover?
I did see there was someone just saying there was kind of I guess there was a bit of a derailed discussion that happened in this thread, unfortunately. But there's just people talking about gaming stuff. We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier.
We did, yeah. Maybe want to move on to the YouTube chat, I guess. Maybe people have been waiting for quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on to the YouTube chat. That's definitely a good idea. So I did see there was a question from, sorry, I've got 6 windows open at the same time. What are your thoughts on Proton Mail banning and later restoring South Korean hacktivist's account? So that was kind of a story that happened a couple of weeks ago at this point. As far as I'm aware, there was sort of requests for those accounts to be deleted because they were participating in some sort of activities that were not savory, I suppose. And those accounts did get banned. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that specifically. I know that there was kind of a bit of backlash on that, and they ended up restoring some of the accounts which were wrongfully disabled because they weren't part of that hacking thing. I don't really think there's a huge amount to discuss on that topic. I think it's certainly interesting. I'm not really super into Proton. I don't really use any of their products, so I can't really comment on what that would be like generally for people, if that's a concern for you. I'm not really sure what that would be like.
I want to go up. I think another user asked something about the U, but let me try finding it.
I guess I'll just expand a little bit on that comment that I just made. I think you should just be careful that you're doing everything within the confines of the law. And if you do something outside the confines of the law, I would expect that you might have your account disabled for breaching the terms of service of Proton. So I'd definitely keep that in mind if you're using their services. I wouldn't use it for anything unsavory, because there is the chance that your account could be deleted and restricted and you'll lose all your credit on your account and also your emails and all your files. So I would be very careful with that, especially if you're putting a lot of your personal information in there and you really require that. I think it's always important to keep backups as well. And if that's a huge concern, you can use a custom domain, and that can sort of protect you a little bit against a lot of those threats, I would say. Did you end up finding that comment, Kevin?
Yes, I did. The Ninja Swordmaster asks, do you think non-EU countries, Europe by the way, should be worried about age verification? It's spreading like wildfire in other countries. I'm worried other countries will start adopting this. Yes, definitely. I think age verification started like outside of the EU, I believe. Like, besides like France, the UK is very known for this. Certain states in the US, Australia, Brazil also started adopting age verification. I don't remember specifics, but I think like being worried about age verification is a bit of an understatement. I think what's more accurate is it is already a wildfire. It's already spreading, and right now it's kind of too late for a lot of countries to like try to like resist it. What a positive, if there is a positive from all of this, is that as more consequences happen, such as the Discord story where like, photo IDs are leaked, I think countries will start like rethinking age verification or figure out ways to do so that isn't so privacy invasive. I think if your country hasn't implemented age verification yet, make sure to contact your representatives. Make it very clear that age verification is a horrible idea, and you can use that Discord story as an example of why age verification is horrible. But of course, more to come. So I'd say keep an eye on the news. If there any sort of implementation of age verification, definitely try to be involved with the grassroots campaigns to oppose it. For countries like the UK, Australia, certain states in the US, Brazil, France, so on and so forth, may seem too late, but there isn't not too late to fight back against it. But yeah, Jordan, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear at this point that like citizen protest is 100% effective, because we did see with the chat control laws, the consideration of chat control being implemented was taken down by citizen protest. So I think it's, a lot of people, I saw there was some comments about this sort of idea of like, you can't really change what happens. I think you definitely can. You just need to make enough noise about it. And I think in at least the case of chat control, I know it's like pretty, it's been pretty heavily criticized at this point. But I think when it comes to like these age verification things, a lot of people are just not really aware of the risks of these systems. And I think it's important to kind of spread that if you can, because I feel like a lot of people aren't as aware as they need to be about this sort of stuff. And it's tricky because it's hard to talk about these topics without like sort of coming across as like, wanting to allow children to access restricted content, right? It sort of puts you in a strange position, but I think it's important to reframe it like towards the actual issue, which is the privacy issue. And I think we've certainly talked about this quite a lot at this point, but there's like censorship concerns with this whole process, and I think it certainly is kind of frustrating to navigate when a lot of the ways that people smear people who are against this as in terrible ways, because it does come across as not wanting to protect children, but really your interests lie in the protection of people's fundamental rights, such as privacy. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think if we make enough noise about this sort of stuff, we can definitely push back and stop these laws from coming into effect. I'm hoping that there's a more pushback on age verification, because in Australia we've we're creeping up towards that January deadline for companies to implement age verification on all their social media platforms for 16-year-olds and under can't access social media. So it's really unfortunate stuff going on. It depends on which country you're in. I know there's like some terrible stuff going on in Europe, in some European countries, but there's also the UK, which is showing us that this is a terrible idea. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to make a stand on things. And I did remember there was actually quite an interesting forum thread here about, the post was taking a stand in your circles, I believe it was called. And there was people just discussing how to make privacy sort of acceptable and viewable by people outside of this space. Because I don't know, I don't know if you have any experiences like this, Kevin, but like talking to someone about privacy, you can kind of come across like you're a bit of a conspiracy theorist. You can come across as someone who's a little bit paranoid. And I think it's tricky to have a conversation like that. And let me just kind of read what this post is by win11.shading291. And basically they wanted to start a topic to discuss, start about how to start talking about privacy in your circles. And they sort of laid out a bunch of interesting steps here about like how to do this, right? And they said the ethos is people don't change unless they themselves are interested in it. And I'd say that's probably true. If you can't like sort of preach to someone, I guess like, yeah, you don't want to come off as like a religious, zealot or like sort of trying to preach to someone, right? I think people will take notice if they're interested. Don't be a vegan when discussing with your closed ones. Don't make privacy your whole identity. I'd say that's interesting. That's certainly an interesting way of putting it. They do say we love vegans. I think I'm vegan, so it's kind of interesting that they brought this up. I think, yeah, there's definitely like a sort of very pervasive idea that people who are vegan like to push it on people a lot and like talk about it all the time and make it their entire identity. And I think that's certainly the case for people in the privacy community. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah. Also, sorry, I had to turn on my camera for a bit because eye strain is ruining my eyes right now. Oh wow. But anyways, um, yeah, I agree 100%. I think for me personally, what I've experienced with like trying to get folks to switch the signal is incredibly difficult. I read a academic paper somewhere in one of my classes. It's called Human Factors in Security and Privacy. And essentially what it is like the network effect is so tough. It's almost impossible to get people to switch away from things. I get that's the biggest barrier for example, Android being like more popular in the US because, the whole like Apple strategy of, blue messages, like, got people to kind of socially, pressure folks to switch to Apple. And that's what happened to me actually. I ended up switching from Android to Apple for college because, you know, we have to like, do it or else get bullied informally, I guess. In like group chats, for example. Um, at least like for my partner, for example, something I noticed that yes, we're able to like, use Signal for quite a bit, but small things with Signal, such as video quality or screen sharing, it's still in its infancy. It's not the best, and for now we have to use like WhatsApp, for example. Um, so I think it's definitely very tough, I would say, from a price perspective. But I think what's more effective is minimization and compartmentalization. It's okay to, of course, use apps you need to use, but it's not the end of the world that you use them. Just don't do anything sensitive over, you know, these apps. Maybe you don't communicate state secrets on WhatsApp, or maybe if you're trying to study private, maybe talk in person, instead of calling over, all over like a regular phone call or texting or SMS. So I think it's like very reasonable to at least be careful with what the information you're trying to transmit, but also try to like actively minimize, the amount of information you're uploading to companies. Because at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world that someone's using like WhatsApp or iMessage to like contact you. And just because they don't use Signal doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It's still end-to-end encrypted. Yes, there are a lot of issues with metadata being transmitted, for example, or the concerns of using big tech in the first place. But I think My advice is, if there's someone who truly cares about you, someone who really wants to continue talking to you, it's okay to take a stand. And the people that won't contact you anymore, if you like, for example, change phones or change like message apps, they're not really your friends, and you don't need to talk to them anymore. I guess that's like kind of like my advice. It's a very slow transition, but you'll be fine. What matters is what you do, not necessarily what other people do. And you don't need to be 100%, like switch over to Signal in one day. It'll take a few years. Maybe your family members and loved ones will um, adopt Signal one day. It just takes a lot of care, and don't be afraid of taking a stand for yourself.
Yeah, I think as well, you have to kind of be comfortable with people just not changing their mind. And that's kind of the unfortunate reality with a lot of people. Like, if they don't value, if that's not something they value or care about, then they're not really going to change. And yeah, you sort of have to do the best that you can. And I know there's some people that have like said, oh, I keep trying to get people to switch to Signal, but everyone just wants to keep using WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or iMessage or Instagram Messenger or whatever. It's tricky. I think it's sort of it's frustrating, and I think the main thing that, like, I did a post on here further down. I sort of want to just quickly cover what I said. Let's see. So yeah, so I said, yeah, there's like parallels between talking to someone about veganism and privacy. Like, it's hard to like challenge someone's behavior and like not come across as like hostile, I guess. Like saying to someone like, why are you using that? That's like harvesting your data. You might come across as like, that might come across to them as like attacking their personal decisions or whatnot. So yeah, it's sort of it's tricky to have that conversation, but I think it's important to discuss that with empathy and kindness. And in a lot of cases, like, not everyone here was always using Signal Messenger. Like, I know I used to use Google for a lot of stuff. And, once I realized that was not a great idea, I moved on to something better. And yeah, I definitely think try not to be too pushy about it, because a lot of people are, I don't know, I guess resistant to change and to changing what they're doing. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting thread. But did you have anything else you wanted to add to that thread, Kevin, before we move on to like sort of closing it out
Um,
here?
I think that's all I have to add, though. I'd say just one final quote, though. Just keep in mind that it's not the end of the world if someone does not communicate with you, like over a certain platform. But you may need to reevaluate, for example, your relationships, and that's like the way people will communicate with you. For example, like if this is a clear value that you have, don't sacrifice it. Um, it may take some time for things to be better, but if you feel like, okay, this is something I can compromise on, take a stand. You know, be proud for yourself because that's a value you have. Don't let anyone else modify it. Just because you need to compromise a few things doesn't necessarily mean that you compromise on your values all the time. There's a fine line between compromising for other people and compromising on yourself, and never do the latter.
Yeah, definitely wise words, I would say. I think there's also like one other question. I was talking about that Proton story, and that's Canabita asked what products to use instead of Proton. Um, Mainly just like self-hosted stuff. So I don't know if you want to look into that, but I don't know. I think like Jonah made like a comment in like a group chat about like, when will you realize that that like every company you use to host your email or like host anything is always going to have issues, and the only way to avoid that is to host it yourself, which I think in a lot of cases you do kind of avoid a lot of that and you get a lot more control. But it's certainly a harder process, and I wouldn't advise everybody to do that, but I think it certainly is a better way to do things, because then you avoid all the drama like with Proton. I feel like there's always like some drama about like, oh, they're not open sourcing their software properly or something like that, and you can kind of avoid it in that case. But it's definitely tricky to navigate, especially when you're dealing with like a company that has leadership, they have people that you don't control. But you definitely do get a better experience. I will say that. Like, it is convenient to use Proton Mail. So, but yeah. Are there any other questions you're seeing here or that we should probably cover before we close out the stream?
No, I'm just like looking at the YouTube stream and it seems to be like, yeah, a lot of comments on what we said earlier. Um, about the mics. Yeah, I think like I don't have a streamer mic. I'm relying on Apple earbuds. Sucks, I know, but it's way better than what we had before. Apparently, auto was very echoey. I had to unpause myself and pause myself every time I talk. So it seemed like a class discussion instead of an actual conversation. So some wins here, some losses here. But yeah, if you have any like streamer mic recommendations, let me know. You may also notice that it's really dark out right now because where I live, the sun sets pretty early, and it's only gonna get worse. So I'm currently relying on really jury ray solution, having a lamp. That's time actually as my backlighting. So yeah, you're still trying to bear through the issues, but keep in mind that slowly and surely we'll reach the level of these top podcasting podcasts out there. So yeah.
You're looking kind of hackerish, with the dark background. But I don't know. I think it's fine. But yeah, we're trying to work out like the quality issues, and I think my audio is probably better this week, but we'll have to see. Okay, there's some other questions just coming in before we close this out. This comment from the Ninja Swordmaster. Part of the reason I don't use any Proton products apart from their email is it's easier to bail if something goes wrong, unlike escaping the Google ecosystem. Yes, I think you're like trading one ecosystem for another ecosystem, right? Like Proton ecosystem is just another ecosystem, and I think they're a lot better at like letting you export your data than Google, but especially because like a lot of cases there's like stuff on Google that you just can't really export, like the news app, for instance. Like you can't really export a lot of stuff, so it's kind of frustrating with Google. But it definitely seems like Proton is trying to move towards like becoming that sort of alternative to Google and just like having a bunch of like services that sort of rival Google and Microsoft and all these other companies. There was a comment from Caleb Tomlinson. Click to see, was there any announcement / reason to believe, aside from general bad practice, that local accounts will get fully blocked in the future Windows releases? I missed most of the stream. And then Jonah linked a comment, and let's have a look at that comment. 1 second. Yes.
Yeah, I believe it's the original forum thread. Yeah, and then Jonah cited the official statement that Microsoft released. So yeah, like Caleb, like if you want to like get caught up on what we talked about, we will be posting a recorded version of this on YouTube and PeerTube. And as always, if you're signed up for our newsletter, you will get a summary of what we talked about, a written version of what we said, and of course, like a more in-depth explanation of the sources as well. So if you don't want to listen to what we said, there is a newsletter version of it where you can access all of our updates that we discussed. So if you want any information on that, feel free to reach out to us on the forum, or I actually just send you to websites that weren't registered for the newsletter. But yeah, like besides that though, Jordan, do you have anything else like add before we close up?
Yes, thanks for covering those things, Kevin. Yes, so like as always, there's going to be a audio version of the podcast. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, or just via RSS in your favorite podcast app if you want to get that, and that'll be going up within a couple of hours. And of course, there will be also timestamps on this recording on YouTube if you want to like catch up and catch a certain part of the stream that you missed. That'll also be going up. So it's also important to mention that Privacy Guides is a non-profit. We're completely independent. We don't take affiliates. We don't have sponsors. We just completely get funded by our community members. So if you do want to support what we're doing, we do have a way to donate on our website. You can do that by going to privacyguides.org And if you look in the top right hand corner, there is a little heart icon. And if you click that, you can become a member or make a donation. And you can use credit card or cryptocurrency to do so. And it's completely private if you use Monero. And if you want to become a member, you can also do that. And you get access to early access videos, such as the Data Broker video, which is coming out later this week. And there'll also be some extra exclusive stuff coming out there if you want to become a member. So definitely check that out if that sounds interesting and you want to support our mission of creating accessible privacy-related content on the internet. And with that being said, that's sort of everything we have this week. This has sort of been a return for Kevin, so hope the audio levels were great. We've kind of trying to troubleshoot that for a little while, but I think it's really good now, and same as the webcam quality. So thanks for sticking with us on that. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye, everyone.